Welcome back to Don't Be Strangers, a podcasting community against adult loneliness. Our mission is to create spaces that foster intentional conversations and deeper connections by providing resources and events for the curious and creative. So I'm your host, Xinyi, and I typically meet my guests for the very first time while recording. If this sounds fun to you, I invite you to consider applying to come on to have a conversation. No qualifications required, just a passion to learn from the stories of everyday people. So first off, Happy New Year's. I did this last year as well, but I had and have had, I guess you could say, a backlog of recorded episodes that I just had no motivation to edit until the turn of the new year. But I'm proud to say that this year, my backlog before the turn of the new year only consisted of one episode, this episode. So I will say that I'm starting off the year strong. Today I'm chatting with my new friend, Marilyn, founder of Popadelics, a mushroom snack. Today I'm chatting with Marilyn, founder of Popadelics, a mushroom snack that is absolutely addicting. I would know because I've tried them. So if you've heard previous episodes, you'll know that I was in New York last August hosting events with a girl named Kate, who is the founder of She Connects Club. And it was perfect because at that time I was preparing for a huge book launch event in September back in Dallas for the book that I published last year, How to Talk to Anyone for Introverts. And I learned from Kate how to cold outreach to get sponsorships. So as you may already have guessed, Popadelics was one of the companies that sponsored us. So in this conversation, we will chat about how Don't Be Strangers started and grew to what it is today, the Renaissance woman, or what I would like to call a creative chimera, which is genderless, non-traditional career paths, and just being rebels, Popadelics and Marilyn's journey into entrepreneurship, and her secret to time management. For that, please meet Marilyn.
Hi everyone, I'm Marilyn Yang. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Fun Gal Snacks, which is the parent company of Popadelics Crunchy Mushroom Chips. I do a lot of things actually. So I actually come from a finance background. I've worked in private equity. I'm actually I wouldn't say I call myself a serial entrepreneur quite yet, but I am involved in a lot of startups. So I am involved with a fashion startup as well. And I've done some angel investing in the past, also kind of all sorts of different types of businesses, but primarily kind of female-founded businesses. So never a dull moment, obviously, in my day-to-day being involved in all of these different things.
Oh my gosh. Also, I forgot to tell you up front too that like I'd like you to ask the first question. Primarily because I've noticed in the past like I tend to go into interview mode and I'll just like start berating you with questions after questions, and then people are like, "Wait, I thought this was a conversation." So yeah, if you ask the first question, then it'll feel more power balanced.
Cool. Well, should I dive straight into it?
Yeah, yes, please.
Cool. So actually, Xinyi, I don't think we've really, I know we've talked about, stuff over email or whatever, but would love to just hear more about your background, like how you got into podcasting and all of that.
Yeah, so just listening to your intro, I'm like, I already have so many questions about, well, obviously I was introduced to you through Popadelics and I didn't even realize it was like a sub-brand underneath like a lot of other things that you have going on. So I think it's really cool that we're both like, well, I use this term for myself, a creative chimera, someone who just dabbles in like a lot of things and is like a student of life and just loves trying and learning things. But the background behind the podcast is really that like initially I was doing YouTube for a while, like way back in the day. I stopped it because I realized it was not actually my vibe, like not what I wanted to do in terms of growing community and connection, because underlying everything that's like my true passion is really fighting adult loneliness, or just fighting loneliness generally speaking. But I feel like adults need it more, just because like kids have the schooling atmosphere to kind of facilitate like socialization, but once that's ripped away, then you have to do a lot more work yourself, like the logistics and scheduling of like social time and managing your social energy. But the podcast started because when I was doing YouTube, I started to really think about collecting content all the time. Once you start like getting into like content creation, you're like, oh, does that make for good content? Or like, what about that? Like, should I be filming now? And so I noticed while I was deep into the deep into like the YouTube realm, that I started to think about sharing conversations I was having with my friends. So like, say you and I were just like on your couch or something and chatting about life or like whatever you're doing, I suddenly think to myself like, man, I really wish like that the camera was running so that like people could hear about your ingenuity, like your creativity, like how like all this started, just the profound topics that I would get into with my friends. I was like, I don't feel like people realize how necessary these sort of conversations are. Like the vulnerable stuff that goes into like your dreams and fears, like future or past, and trying to make that more accessible and like making us all realize that we're not that different, despite different cultural upbringings or ethnic backgrounds. So, fast forward, podcasts. I'm consuming a lot of podcasts, and I thought to myself, oh, this is so great. Like, I love learning about other people and how they think, but the majority of these podcasts are niched in that they target people with accolades. So it's like, oh, because you've written a book, because you've won this prize, like, you're worth listening to. And I thought, well, I personally feel like there's something to be learned from everyone. You don't have to vibe with everyone. You could be like, your personality is very like off-putting to me, or like maybe we just really don't share any interests, so I don't want to be your friend. But despite all of that, I still feel like there's something to be learned from everyone's like stories and backgrounds. So I thought, just for fun, let's start Don't Be Strangers, and allow anyone to apply. So no like requirements. You just have to be interested in like sharing your voice. And also I have started to think like you also need to be interested in like fighting adult loneliness, because like I need to filter the filter the application somehow. But that's how the podcast started, and we are now at like more than 2 years in. It's just a side gig thing. Like I don't make money off of this. I literally do this out of like pure passion. And I think what keeps me going truly is the fact that these are conversations. Because I think back on it and I'm like, if this was just like a monologue podcast, like me like again, I'm thinking back like YouTube, like me sharing my life, me telling you about like my experiences as like an Asian American girl in her 20s, or stuff like that. Like at some point I would probably have gotten sick of like continuing to create new topics for myself, or like listening to myself when I edit. But like what keeps me going is that like I love these conversations, and when I edit them again, I like get to relive the joy of like learning from past me and like my co-host, and then like I feel re-inspired to like have another conversation to like keep it going. Yeah.
No, I love that. And I kind of like how what did you describe us as, like creative chimeras? I've never heard of
Yes,
that one.
yes, yes.
Yeah, what I typically use is like Renaissance person, Renaissance woman, I guess.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
because
yes,
like
yes.
I feel like it's not as common today as, or maybe I have the perception that it's not as common today to do so many different things at once that are different from each other. Um,
Right.
and maybe it's because I feel like society in general has gotten really specialized. And
Yep.
so if you're like a doctor, you're only doing like doctor stuff, like even like
Yep.
as your hobbies or whatever. You're like, I don't know, volunteering at a clinic or whatever, right?
Yep.
But which is fine. But I feel like it's almost like a lost art, or maybe it's
Yeah.
just underappreciated sometimes, that like, yes, I, come from finance, but that doesn't mean I can't do like, I don't know, kickboxing or whatever.
Right.
Or I feel like it's, for me at least, I don't know if this is how you feel about it. For me, it feels like a continuation of how I've always been, like in
Mm,
school, like as a kid,
yep.
I've always had really eclectic interests. So like when I was a kid, right, like I was, pretty like scholarly and like technical, and like I was like pretty, I think I was good at math at some point or whatever academically. But I was also like really into the arts, and like I did some like, modeling, acting stuff. And it's like
Ooh,
stuff that,
wow.
and like I was pretty sporty as well. Like I played tennis and ran track and whatever. And so it's just like a broad mix of different types of stuff that like don't fit. And I think that's maybe the thing. It just doesn't fit into like one stereotype, especially like
Yep.
maybe in like the
Yep.
high school context, right? Like I never
Right.
fit into like a clique, like a clique or anything. And I think I've always, and I think maybe that's translated into me and my friend groups and like growing up as well. Like I'm like very much so like a floater. So like I've
Mm,
always been kind of the essentially almost like the wild card in all my friend groups where, like I have a lot of disparate friend groups where I'm
yeah.
kind of like the wild card, whereas I feel like a lot of other people, they just have one core group, whereas I have like
Yes.
multiple,
Yeah.
almost like multiple different groups that I, associate with or hang out with, depending on maybe the context or the situation.
Wait, this is resonating like so hard. So did you ever feel like with that sort of like background, did you ever feel like isolated in that like or were you very comfortable with just being like, "Oh yeah, like I don't have like a core group and I'm totally okay just like floating between all these people."
I feel like it was like I realized pretty early on as a kid that I was just different, like for a lot of different reasons. I feel like everyone's unique in their own ways, right? But I maybe like I was just very early on like nonconformist, I guess, because I feel like a lot of people they might be different, but they kind of maybe shape themselves to fit into a mold or whatever. But I was
Mm-hmm.
just throwing all of that out the window. And I think part of that might be I'm an only child, so maybe it's only a child thing, like kind of used to being on my own and kind of being
Yeah,
like my own person or whatever.
right.
I'm sure there's some personality elements. I don't know how much of it's nature versus nurture. I feel like I, talk about that all the time as well. But I've taken like for fun, like I feel like I'm one of those like desktop like psychologist people who likes to psychoanalyze themselves. So, I'm trying to figure it out, but I can't figure out how much is nature versus nurture. But again, I feel like there was something inherent where I guess it's almost like I was the inner rebel in me. I almost like liked subverting like I got joy
Yeah.
out of subverting social structures, basically.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, me too. Like definitely like a very soft core rebel is how I would describe
Yeah,
myself.
for sure.
I say soft core because it would be things like my parents wanted me to play violin, so I picked viola. They wanted me to take
Actually, I did the
Spanish, so
same
I
thing. I
took
played
French.
viola. I played viola. Oh, actually, no. I That's actually so funny. I did the exact same thing. I played viola, not violin. I played clarinet, not flute.
Oh my God.
And yeah, and I also took French and not Spanish. So
Oh my God. No, like
it's too
literally all
funny.
this just because I was like, if my parents were telling me to do it, I'm not gonna do it. What's the alternative?
Wait, actually,
Um,
that was definitely my thought process as a kid. So
Yeah, no, look,
yeah,
because like, no kidding, I had no idea what a viola was. I was just like, it's just not the violin, so I will take that. So
yeah.
that's
I think it was like that
hilarious.
about my parents, but I think it was almost like I wanted to be different in some ways as well, like
Oh,
from
okay,
the
yeah,
other
yeah, yeah.
kids, because it's like a lot of, especially like a lot of the other like girls in school, right? They
Mm-hmm.
all wanted to play the violin or the flute, and I was like, well, I don't want to just be like another one of them. I want to be like
Right.
my own person, or I want to be different. Like I
Yeah.
almost wanted to be different, which is interesting. I guess
Wow.
it's again, it's
That
like I don't know
is
how much of that's
really,
nature versus
that's
nurture
really
still, but
progressive. Yeah. No, I
yeah, I don't
feel like
know.
that's really progressive because I've thought about this a lot and this and how like as children naturally speaking I think we want to be conformative because we don't want to like stand out and be bullied, but then when you become an adult you realize that like being conformative just is actually the losing game because then like you can't be recognized or anything, and so like when you go get into adulthood you're like actually it's cool to be like different, so I think it's very progressive that you were like always just like yeah whatever like I want to choose the alternative path and just be different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of
um
it again was nature versus nurture, but I feel like a good amount of it was that I was so different than everyone. And to your point, it was like progressive. Like it's progressive now. It was like way progressive, like 20 years ago or whatever. So
yeah, yeah,
like because I was so different, I just had to get. This is a me
just leaned
psychoanalyzing
into
myself,
it.
but yeah, I just kind of like embraced it. I was like, okay, well, there's no way I'm fitting in, so I'm just gonna like really go for it.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Wait, so this makes me wonder, how did you get into finance and how did that lead into everything that you're doing now?
Yeah, it's actually like I feel like I always joke. I feel like I still kind of fell into finance by accident a little bit. Because it's kind of funny because I think how you describe it, soft core nonconformist, it's like very fitting because it's like I do these like small things that are nonconformist, but at the end of the day, like especially in the community that I grew up in and kind of like the expectations for me growing up, like even if they weren't directly from my parents, but like from my community or whatever, I still ended up actually basically doing what they would have wanted me to do anyway. Like, it just kind of like was on my own terms, maybe is kind of like
Yeah.
where maybe the
Mm-hmm.
differentiation was because I feel like growing up in the Asian American community, I feel like there's a lot of pressure to, like, from your parents or community or whatever. I think I was fortunate where it wasn't coming from my parents, but I definitely felt it from my community that you had to, go to a certain school, get a certain type of career, do a certain
Mm-hmm.
thing in life. And I never liked that, I guess, as a nonconformist. I mean, I was really fortunate that my parents weren't like this. And so props to my parents for being ultra progressive Asian parents. But my community, right? Because I was going to Chinese school. I was hanging out with a lot of other Asian American kids. A lot of them, I got the sense that even if they, for example, also ended up in finance, it wasn't what they personally maybe wanted to do, or maybe they never really had a chance to think about what they wanted to do. I feel like even though I also ended up in finance, at least it was at my own volition. So, because
Mm.
it really is actually, I feel like, so I'm in private equity now, and I would say if I didn't know what private equity was when I was a kid, but if I could create a job for myself, it's pretty close to what I probably would have wanted to do kind of in
Okay.
general. So I feel like it all worked out in the end. It's just kind of amusing and ironic to me that it ended up being something that the community at large would have probably, one of the things that they would have probably pushed kids into anyway. So, like, typical,
Right.
immigrant community, they want you to be a lawyer, doctor, or in finance or whatever. So,
Right.
but
Right.
at
Right.
least for me,
Right.
right, I do feel like it was at my own volition, or at least it fit like my own interests, and I wasn't doing it just because other people had the
Mm.
expectations that I would.
That's awesome. Yeah. So you are full time, like day job, private equity, and then on the side, entrepreneur. Or am I getting that description
Yeah,
incorrect?
that's right. I thought I guess it's like a blurred line, like what's technically the day job or whatever. I feel like it's
Right.
almost like it's more like everything all at once movie reference.
Yes. Right. Right.
Yeah,
Right. Yep.
it literally is like I'm doing everything together. I feel like on paper, yes, that's like my, day job in terms of like income and whatever, of course, my taxes or
Right.
whatever. But like in
Right.
terms of like what I'm actually doing on a day to day, it can be pretty blurred, like what I'm doing.
Right. 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 No, that makes sense. Yeah. So how many like side gigs are you juggling then?
Yeah, it's
Like
hard
in
to keep
terms of
track
like the
sometimes.
businesses? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, primarily, right, I'm working on Popadelics, and I'll go into it a little bit. So we structured it for essentially our vision. So I co-founded it with my now husband, actually, and we structured it like almost like where we saw the company ultimately being like 10 or 15 years from now, even if we aren't involved with it. But we saw an opportunity not just with mushrooms, but other what we call underloved veggies. So kind of like you go into the snack
Mm,
aisle, it's a lot of the same stuff over and over again,
yeah.
and like not, it's almost like the championing the underdog vegetables basically that are
Uh,
getting their time in the spotlight. So kind of like mushrooms, I feel like they've got a bad rep, like, but I don't know, like I think people just haven't had mushrooms in the right way. So we were really inspired to start Popadelics there. But the reason we have our parent company, Fun Gal Snacks, is that ultimately we see opportunity with all sorts of other vegetables. So we wanted to structure
mm,
the company to where like we could come out with different brands, ultimately, each featuring like other underloved veggies or whatever. Yeah, so that's the story behind that. But I would say primarily, I guess at least like from a mental standpoint, I guess my main focuses are, the my private equity job and a career, and then also Papadelics. But then I do on the side, I'm really passionate about getting more females into the finance world, in particular in
mm.
private equity, because typically private equity is not your first job out of school. Traditionally, it's not, the industry is not recruited out of undergrad. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're recruiting out of banking. And I think what I've noticed now on the other side of the table, we actually just recruited some junior people, is that a lot of women in finance tend to drop out early. So like even
Mm,
if like out of undergrad it's pretty even, I think it's fairly even, like 50-50 males, females going into that entry level finance job. It's just
mm-hmm.
that later on, like all the females are dropping out, and I get why. It's, it's a rough lifestyle. There's a lot of, bad cultures at different banks and wherever else. But it's just unfortunate because if they had stayed, there would be better opportunities out there. And unfortunately, like for example, like when we were interviewing, I probably reviewed like 100 resumes. Five of them were from women, which is really sad
Well,
for me to see
yeah.
as a woman in finance. and I was, I would have gone out of my way to really advocate for a female candidate who was, obviously also qualified, but,
Right.
there just wasn't any. And
Yeah.
so I'm really passionate about that. And so I do some, through like some of the big finance platforms out there, like Wall Street Oasis or Wall Street Prep. I do like resume editing on the side as well, just like general mentorship
To
stuff as
help.
well.
Wow.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
help, like mainly to encourage women to get into finance, but obviously I don't discriminate. It's really anyone who wants to get into finance. I really like helping people navigate the industry. Since again, like I feel like I didn't know anything about it growing up. So if you're going out of your way to learn about it, I feel like it's great to have resources like that out there. So I do
Yeah.
that on the
Yeah.
side
Yeah.
as well. And then I do. I don't have too much bandwidth to do much of it, but I am interested in angel investing and whatnot, and I am involved in a fashion startup as well. And so
Wow.
I think that pretty much encompasses it. But yeah, I feel like never a dull moment and never always a different thing. I feel like that's focused on each
Right.
day.
So I'm going to pause here to say that if you found any part of this conversation useful or interesting, please pause to give this show a follow and a rating. Or if you know of any loved ones who could find this information helpful, please take 2 seconds to send them this episode.
So
Right. So what is it about private equity and like finance? What are because you said that like you mentioned something along the lines of like if as a child you could have created your dream job, this is pretty close to it. What are the qualities of like what you do today that like aligns so well with like what you enjoy or who you are?
yeah, I think maybe at the most basic level, it just like really fits maybe my skill set too. So I'm like a pretty analytically minded person. Like I like
Mm.
doing, numerical analysis and like whatever. But I'm not like one of because some analytical people are like they want to be locked away in a closet, right? Like I'm also like relatively social, or I don't know if I'm
Mm.
social, but I'm definitely an extrovert, and I feel like people have a maybe a I think the broad public maybe has the wrong interpretation of what an extrovert means. I think for me,
Mm.
I'm an introverted extrovert. So I'm like not
Okay.
necessarily like the loudest person in the room, but I like being around people. Like I don't think I could
Mm.
survive like if I was just like in a cabin in the woods. I could do that maybe like a little bit, but it's like truly the definition of extrovert where I get energy from being around people. So I need to be around people
Mm.
basically,
Right.
and I like interacting with
Right.
people. And I feel like I like communicating and getting stuff done. So obviously all great qualities at the job in general, but I think I just really like what we're doing. So especially at my firm, private equity is a huge industry. It runs the gamut. There's different types of experiences in it. But what we're
Mm-hmm.
doing and what my firm focuses on, we're buying typically or getting involved with a lot of founder owned or generationally owned businesses. So typically,
Okay.
when we're acquiring a business, we're the first time that that business has ever had institutional quote unquote capital.
Mm.
And I just think it's really cool to work with people who've built a business like on their own. They've run it successfully for, who knows how long. A lot of times it's because the person wants to retire, but other times it's just because they're like, well, I'm at the stage now where I kind of, to grow it even more, like I need like external capital to do
Right.
that and maybe more
Right.
expertise, and I need to professionalize my business. And it's just really
Mm.
fun to be that first person to come in basically to help them. And especially like where I'm at today, like I get to be the one who's basically talking. I mean, I talk to these some of our executives like at least every week, but it's just really cool to be involved in their businesses.
Yeah.
And I think it's great. It's great education for me as well for really seeing kind of like what makes a good business, what makes a bad business. I feel like I have a developing sense of what a business should be doing as a result of being in this job. But I think at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's just really cool, right? Because it's like I get to essentially help people grow their businesses. Um,
Mm.
and a lot of these businesses are like the backbone of the country, right? A lot of the manufacturing businesses that people don't think of. It's not like the
Right.
cool hip, like Silicon Valley like tech startup, right? These are like,
Mm-hmm.
the company that manufactures, some random part that goes into your washing machine, right?
Right.
But it's like super important stuff because without that, your washing machine wouldn't work, and no one thinks
Right.
about that the company that does that. But just really cool
Right.
that like someone was able to develop a business out of it. and was able to make it so successful. And, we get to be involved in that. And we're always looking at new businesses too. I think a part of it is probably just like learning about so many of these random businesses and industries that you wouldn't think about otherwise.
Well, yeah, that does sound perfect for you then, like in terms of just being able to like dabble in a bit of like all these different industry lines and like learning about like the domain knowledge for these different like I guess businesses. That's so cool for sure. There was like a follow-up question I had in there, but I've since lost it. You
I feel like I
gave me a
tend to
lot of
ramble. I feel like I have a lot to say about a lot of these things, as you can tell. But
no, wait, I
yeah.
remember now. It was like regarding startups. Like, did you always want to do your own business, or was it after you started helping these other small businesses that you were inspired?
Yeah, I feel like I've always wanted to start my own thing. I was one of those like lemonade stand type kids. Like I always was trying to pawn something off to someone. Like I don't know, I would try to sell like Play-Doh sculptures to my family members at some point. So I was always like trying to hustle something. So I always
Yeah.
wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I think what prevented me from doing something earlier than I ended up doing, personally anyway, was I think it was a combination of not having the right idea, but also like one again, like being a nonconformist, wanting it to do it my own way. So I think not having the right idea, I didn't want to just start like a Me Too something. And
Yeah.
not that there aren't mushroom chips out there, there are other mushroom chips out there, but there really was a white space in terms of like a kind of a hip modern brand focused on mushroom chips that's targeted to more of a Western audience because all the products that generally exist today are imports from Asia. And so it's just like
Mm.
a slightly different, like there was like truly just a white space there.
Mm.
And I think doing it my own way, I think I was fortunate to more recently be in a position where I could essentially self-fund the business. And again, this is more, it's probably ties all back to like, I'm sure there's some Freudian analysis for this, but I don't like, I have
Mm.
like some deep rooted, whether it's like society or like authority, I just like don't like a conforming basically, I guess theme
Mm.
of this conversation. Um, and so I didn't like that traditional path of entrepreneurship that I feel like is perpetuated in the media where you have to go out and raise money and
Mm.
like it's kind of like you're either all in or like all out. It's
Yep.
like there's
Yep. Yep.
perception that you have to, if you're starting a company, you have to be focused on it like 100%, to drop everything and raise
Mm.
money. And I feel like that's actually like a very privileged view, right? Because practically for
Yes.
most people, you need to pay your bills, right? Like you can't just like
Right.
drop
Yeah.
everything and like spend your days raising capital if you have to worry about paying rent. Right?
Yeah.
And I feel
Yeah.
like it's a very privileged group of people who are able to do that. So that's one thing. But I think another thing is just like that's not the right way to go about, I think, certain industries. I guess having
Mm.
seen like certain industries as well, I think it works in tech mostly, and that's probably where we hear about some of these successes, like Uber. And not that Uber, it's just a top of mind because I was watching. I guess we were rewatching the one. What was the version with Joseph Gordon-Levitt where he played Travis Kalanick? We were just rewatching that show, but anyway, like companies like that type of business model, I think are lend itself well to maybe like venture type of backing or like external
Mm.
capital because you just need a lot of equity to grow very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like any sort of material goods business where you're like physically making something, it doesn't actually make that much sense to raise that kind of money. I think obviously you still need money, but I feel like it actually makes more sense to rely on like debt capital versus equity because um, if you're relying on equity to continue to build or make your stuff, you're stuck in an endless cycle if you think about it, right? You're always having to raise more equity, and at some level, at some day, you're personally not going to have anything left, right? Or it's just not sustainable because at some point the company needs to be able to sustain itself to where you can essentially the company can support its own manufacture of products because otherwise it's just not a viable business model to begin with.
Mm.
Um, and so I feel like the not that I knew much about this CPG or snack business before I went into it, but it's just not an industry I feel like that lends itself well to external capital, or at least too early on. Because I feel like
Mm.
that's the other misconception too, that like I feel like for these tech companies, right, people are raising money before they even have a working prototype.
Yep.
I feel like for CPG, it almost has to be, you have to have a product and have a demonstrated track record before you go and do that, because
Yeah.
there's so much of that early stuff that can go wrong, and it's such a long process. And we've seen it from the inside now that it would be
Yeah.
too distracting almost to have investors at that early stage.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. How long have you been doing papadelics or fungal
Well, actually, we
snacks?
only just launched our product in April of 22, but we've been working
Okay.
on it since the summer of 2020. So it's been, and I feel like that's the other misconception too, that like, I feel like there's a lot of good quotes on this, but like, no overnight success happens
Yep.
overnight. Right. But because like I feel like from the outside looking in, it looks like we've like been able to do all of this in like less than a year or whatever, like all of the stuff we've been able to
Mm.
do. But really, it was like 3 years plus now of groundwork that we
Yeah.
had to do to make it look like we were able to do all of this in like 6 months or whatever. but
Right.
it,
Right.
but
Yeah.
even like 3 years is not long in the grand scheme of the industry either. And our product's like only been out there for a year, so like, we've spoken to founders who've been in it for like 15 years, right? And it's like
Mm-hmm.
even then you're still having to like prove yourself or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's just like a very like long industry as well, just by nature of like
Yeah.
there's systemic things to why that is, but because of the
You're
speed of
talking
it,
about like specifically for snacks and
for like
food?
food or just like food, I think
Okay.
any sort of packaged food products like
Okay.
or maybe probably any food product because it kind of touches on the same players, like it's just a very long industry for you to get something off the ground, like even if you're doing everything in your power to.
Mm.
And so because of that, I feel like this, just by nature of the speed of it, it's not a good fit for institutional capital, because most institutional
Yeah.
investors, right, they have a timetable, right? Like even for
Right.
us in
Right. Right.
private
Right.
equity, right? Like we have a timetable. We're not going to like, we're not going to be in there for like 15 years, at least not
Yeah.
voluntarily or on purpose. Like
Yeah.
we're typically looking at like 3 to 7 years or whatever. And so I feel like just by nature of the pace of the industry of what we've seen, and also just in general, like the kind of returns profiles of the companies in the industry, it doesn't make sense to give up equity that early for
Yeah.
that.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. So did you realize that it would be such a long game before you decided to go into snacks, or was that something you learned while you had already made the decision and like committed?
Yeah, we definitely learned it along the way. I think it was maybe almost like the downside of coming from like an industry like finance, because we've only, both me and my co-founder, we've only worked in finance before in our professional
Mm-hmm.
lives, and I feel like it's a bit of a bubble in terms of the pace of work in the industry. Like
Mm.
we get stuff done very quickly, right? And
Yeah.
we just got a deal done that we started looking at it, I don't know, in March, and we closed it this month, and even that was considered long. So we were able to do a
Mm.
whole like M&A transaction in like 6 months or whatever, right? But in the
Yeah.
snack industry, it's just a totally different pace. But I don't think it's necessarily the fault of the snack industry. I think it was just that our experience was just so outside of the norm of like the
Yeah.
typical pace of people working. And so I think
Yeah.
that just took a bit to get used to. And I think it really opened my eyes up too to kind of like what a bubble we've been in as well. Because
Mm.
also like there's a
Yeah.
broader array of personalities and people and different backgrounds in the snack industry,
Yep.
because it's not like in finance you had to go to a certain type of school, you had to study a certain type of thing to get into it. Like you
Yeah.
could anyone could go into snacks, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think so I think it's actually been a better experience from that standpoint, where I think it's made me a bit more open-minded in terms of like other people's like work experiences, because finance is just not normal and it's a very small
Right.
percentage of the
Right. Right. Right.
population, and I think it's good to get more perspectives. It was good for me to get more perspectives too on what what the common person in a normal job is actually dealing with.
Right. 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 Yeah. How do you balance your time against like all the things that you are involved in?
I feel like some of it I feel like comes naturally. I feel like I've always been, like I said, like even from like when I was a kid, I did a lot of this, like a lot of random disparate stuff like all together all the time. So I'm used to like being involved in all these different sorts
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
things. I feel like what makes it work for me is I feel like I've almost had to do this. You almost have to, but like I just don't let I don't dwell on things basically. So if I'm
Mm.
not doing something, I'm just not thinking about it. And so it's more like I'm like
Oh.
ultra efficient almost with like my brain space. So
Okay. Yeah.
it's
Like
like
you're
not
just very
even
focused, like on
right, like
whatever
when I'm doing
your
something, I'm
task.
focused
Yeah.
on it, but like when I'm
Yeah.
not doing it, I'm not thinking about it at all. Because I feel like that's
Oh.
where people who are doing, that's my hypothesis, that I feel like a lot of people aren't able to handle doing too many things at once. It's because they're
Mm.
always worrying about everything at once. And you just can't, I mean, there's just
Yeah.
no way you can get through the day if that's the, like I have too many things to think
Yeah.
about if I'm worrying about everything at once. But it's more like, if I'm not looking at that, I'm just not even thinking about it. Like it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
I put like a
And that's
mental like binder.
oh.
Like if the mental binder is not like checked out from the library, it's not being looked at.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. And this is something that's been like natural to you your entire life, or was it something that you had to learn?
I think it's natural now, but I think I actually initially had to learn it because I feel like when I was a kid, I had really bad, it wasn't diagnosed formally, but I think looking back on it, I probably had pretty bad OCD. Um,
Okay.
and it was to the point where if I had misplaced like a pillow or a towel or something before I went to school, it would like distract me the entire day. So it was like pretty bad
Oh. Yeah.
when I was younger. And I think it was like as me kind of like having to get over that, that's like
Right.
essentially what I've been able to create. I've been able to create these like essentially like mental spaces to silo
Yeah.
things so that they don't bother me. So like I'm not really OCD at all anymore, but I think that's
Right.
part of it. It's not that it doesn't bother me, but it's just like I don't think about it. So
Yeah.
whereas it
No.
used to be
Yeah,
like this
yeah.
obsessive, it used to be this obsessive thing, like, oh, I misplaced that, or I didn't turn off that, or like, I need to do this, and I can't like fixate off of it or whatever. But now it's like, I feel like it's almost like I made it a benefit for me to have had to like, I guess, uh, get over kind of that barrier.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, obviously I'm like interested because I also like my day job as a software engineer, and then I do don't like this podcast. Like, so Don't Be Strangers started as this podcast, but then I grew it into a community because I love meeting people, but then I wanted other people to meet each other. It's like the community aspect of it. And so now this podcast is like my side project. Like literally I just do this.
I completely relate.
Yeah, and then the community has kind of become like the centerpiece for Don't Be Strangers, like under this brand, I guess, so to speak. And then the community aspect like started as like a digital pen pals club because I'm nomadic as well, so I'm like I was like, let's make it digital, let's just like connect people around the world. And then the people in the Pen Pals Club were like, actually, can we do Zoom calls? Can we meet each other? And I was like, okay, whatever. So then it turned into like digital events. This was all still around like the pandemic 2021, early 2022. And then I was like, well, since I'm already doing like online events, let me try to start up in-person events. And I'm like the opposite of you in that I'm an extroverted introvert. So like I love like bringing people together, but I like people depending on who it is can exhaust me or like can really like energize me and inspire me and yeah, and for me I don't like it because it almost feels like a gamble every time I interact with like a group of people or someone. I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna feel better after this or worse after this.
That's amazing
But
that
you
you
know
put
the
yourself
people.
out. You still put yourself out there, though. You're like, I'm willing to take the
Yes.
gamble. So,
Right, right, right. Yeah, so it's evolved now. Like I've been doing a year of events in Dallas, but I'm also traveling at the same time. So like when I'm out, like I have volunteers in place helping me, and it's I'm like trying to recall why I'm explaining this to you. Oh yeah, so in person events like the last month, me coming back from New York, which by the way, I think I was introduced to your brand because I was collaborating with a girl who you had sponsored out in New York. So this
oh,
is
such a
how
small
like
world.
this is how we met. Yeah, this is how we met.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm like, oh my God, I am going crazy with like having to manage my day job, like the events, the podcast on the side, which like the backlog is like ever growing. And I'm like, I just do this for fun because I want to. And I'm thinking through like, I think I probably need to restructure how I do the events just to, like to protect my own energy because like I often think to myself I'm like if I was extroverted then this would be so much easier like the event stuff, but like I have to say I have never been a group hangout person. just because I really appreciate one-on-ones and like the depth of conversation that you can achieve in one-on-one conversations. And so I'm like, how did I get here? How did I go from like someone who never attended group events to like someone leading group events? And it's like a whole different dynamic when you have to like lead a group event as opposed to just like hang out in a group event, right? So that was why I was like really curious about your take on like managing time and energy. Because I'm like,
Yeah, I feel like a
I
lot of
don't
it,
know,
yeah, it's just like mental energy. Yeah, just like
yeah,
I don't know. I've developed a system for myself to just not think about stuff when I'm not doing it. Or I think
yeah,
a big part of it too is just like finding people you trust to outsource certain things. I feel like you
yeah,
just have to at some level.
right,
And
right, right, right.
obviously we can't do that for everything, but it's more like
Whatever you can, yeah,
yeah, whatever you can, like finding. And so it sounds like you're doing that with getting people to help with the events and that sort of thing. Um,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
so funny how we were connected though. I feel like it's like one of those things. I feel like every day I feel like the world feels smaller. So it really is like I feel like you're only like I think it's 5 degrees of separation, right, from like anyone in the world. I think it is.
Oh,
But yeah, it's just
really?
crazy to see. I
Anyone?
think so. I think
Wow.
so.
Yeah,
Which is crazy, but I feel like I've seen that happen a few times in my life. So, um,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
but yeah. And so where do you travel? Or like how do you travel? Like so are you based in Dallas, but you like will go on like these like
Yeah.
month long kind of things or
Yeah, no, like I'm talking about like quarter long things.
oh
So it
wow.
started like I think like shortly after I graduated. So when I was in college, like one of my friends really infected me with her travel bug. Like she like showed me the accessibility of travel. Yes, it can be costly, but she basically just like being another average Asian American person, so not rich, not extremely poor or anything, just like me, like involved herself in like study abroad and like different programs that like brought her to Vienna and like Europe, which gave her access to all of Europe. Another like business finance, so she was also doing pursuing finance, brought her like the business school brought her to like Australia, so she also stopped through New Zealand. And I was like, oh, so it doesn't have to be like a big vacation thing, you can literally just integrate it into your life, was what I learned from like watching her do
Hmm.
this in like her school years. So shortly after that, I discovered the concept of like a digital nomad and just being able to work from anywhere. But I had just started my career as like a software engineer, and like while tech technically is like one of the best fields to be in, to be a digital nomad, like my company that I worked for, like some clients were like in office and it was like all local. So I was like, yeah, maybe like eventually, I don't know. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, yeah, it was like very unfortunate in a lot of ways, but I take my silver linings. And like one of the silver linings was that my job became completely remote. And I was like,
Nice.
I have waited my entire career to be able to like be a digital nomad. So I remember like I think
And
it was back in
it stayed remote though because I feel like I know
yes,
some people which
yes.
unfortunately they went remote but now it's not.
I know, but like no,
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate that it's still remote. So
Great.
yeah, so like shortly after that, like when things started to like stabilize and like things were starting to open again, I was like, you've waited your entire career for this, so you better like just grab onto this opportunity and like make sure you take advantage of it. So I remember I did like 5 weeks out in Chicago. So I'm based in Dallas. I did 5 weeks out in Chicago because I was like, let's just start with something easy, domestic, and then after that, I traveled with a digital nomad group. Like you apply for
Oh
and
cool.
like travel with them. And I did Oaxaca, Mexico, and then Playa del Carmen
And how do those
with
groups
them.
work? Is it just like other people also with all remote jobs?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. But you like
Okay.
apply in, and then after you apply in to be with the group, then you can buy like different, I guess you could say like packages, but like okay, like I'm gonna go with them for 4 weeks to Oaxaca or like 6 weeks
And
to
do you
Playa
like
del
do they help
Carmen.
like arrange your like rent and like housing and stuff while you're
Accommodations, yeah,
there?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was part of like why I wanted to travel with them initially, because I was like, I don't know how to do the like international, and I was like,
Yeah, like
Mexico is
Airbnb
really
or
close
whatever.
to, right,
Yeah.
yeah, and Mexico's super close to like Texas, so I was like, I was literally in my mind like an emergency like shutdown situation, I'll just like hop on a plane and get back to Dallas real fast from Mexico. And I so that trip, so after Chicago, I had the courage to go like to Mexico, but within the safety capsule bubble of like that group. And I was there for like I would say about 3 months, like 2.5
Oh, wow.
months with that group.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I went home and I loved it so much. I told my husband, I was like, he wasn't with me with that trip. I was just like, I'm doing this.
Mhm.
He didn't have a remote at that time. I went back and I was like, I love it so much. We have to do Mexico City. So like, I think I was back in Dallas for like a month, and then we turned around and went back to Mexico City for like another
Oh,
two and a
wow.
half months. And so like now my cadence is like, this is what I like, is like coming back for 3 months, traveling for 3 months, and then coming back. So I'm like out half the year. But the reason why I like this is because there are two seasons I absolutely detest in Dallas, which is winter and summer. Summer is like, over
Too hot.
100 every single day.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you can't do anything. It's like miserably hot. Like the moment you step outside, all your energy is like zapped because your body's just trying to keep you alive, against the heat. And then
That's
winter
actually how
sucks
I felt.
because
That's how I felt when I was in Vietnam, because I guess I didn't realize how bad it was, but I
but
was
there's
there in the summer.
humidity too, no?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, no, it
with
was.
yeah, no.
I went for my post grad trip. This is like kind of like making me think of my post grad travels. I definitely wasn't like in places for as long as you have been, but yeah, like we were there in May, June, which is like very, very hot. But it was good because there
Oh
was no
my
one. Very,
God.
very
Yeah.
few tourists were there because of
Yes.
that. But yeah, it
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
literally like I stepped outside and I was sweating buckets. But like what was crazy was the locals were not breaking a sweat at all. So
Well, they're adopted,
I
so
I don't know. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. um, but I lost my train of thought. It wasn't important. Basically, I think all I was saying was like summer sucks, winter also sucks because it doesn't get as cold as up north, but then like we don't have the infrastructure, so like
Oh,
to deal with the cold. So I remember like a couple of years ago in February, like the entire state of Texas shut down because
I
we
remember
had
that
snow and
too.
ice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had a
Yeah.
snowpocalypse, and like for an entire week while we were all still online trying to work, we lost like electricity,
Oh,
water.
geez.
And so yeah, like, and I was like, oh well,
I
it's just
remember it
because we
being pretty
literally,
bad.
yeah, so I was like, I don't want to be here in February ever again. Like, this is just stupid. Like, so that's how I plan my travels. But I saw in your notes that you're trying to plan your next trip. Where are you thinking?
I am, and actually, we're ultimately trying to be nomads as well. I think right now it's a bit hard because I am still technically tied down to a job where I have to go into the office, every
Oh,
now and then, which
yeah,
is fine. I actually don't mind. But actually,
yeah.
partly, we are at least. I mean, this is not like as exciting as like international travels, but we are moving part time to Miami. So I'm currently based in New York City. But we're going to be. I would say we're probably going to be in Miami more than we'll be in New York from now on, or at least starting next month, which will be
Oh my
fun
God.
because.
So as in
Um,
like you're gonna have property in both, and you're just gonna bounce back and forth?
Yeah, exactly. Like we're gonna keep our place in New York and rent a new place in Miami, and we'll kind of like you escape the seasons we don't like. Because same thing in New
Yeah.
York, yeah. Like I don't really like the winter here. I mean, recently the snow hasn't been as bad. It's just like cold and dark. And so I feel like the
Oh,
seasonal
yeah.
affective disorder really gets to me because it's like the sun, even when the sun's out, it's not really out. It just feels like dim.
Mm,
It's like a
yeah.
dim, sad light bulb. And so um, and so like it'll be nice to because like we basically will be moving next month. I mean, it's kind of like low stress way to move too because I feel like typically moving is like so
Yeah.
stressful, but like we're not as stressed out because it's like oh well we'll still have our stuff in New York. If we forget anything, we'll be back like next month. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of nice too. But like that'll be kind of fun because it'll feel like a permanent vacation because I'm originally from like the DC area, which is like similar
Uh-huh.
climate to like New York, and
Yes.
my husband's from like the Midwest, which is like freezing. So, because like we've never lived in a place that's like nice weather year round with a beach, so it'll
Yeah.
feel to us
Yeah.
like a permanent vacation, which is going to be kind of nice. And we'll be dipping out of New York in the bad months, and in the summer months when it's way too hot there, we'll be back in New York. So that's like
Nice.
our light version of maybe like starting that. But ultimately, we would love to do like similar to maybe what it sounds like you're doing, like spend a maybe like not a quarter at a time, but like spend a month like I don't know in Portugal or something, or spend a
Yes.
month in
Yes. Yes.
like
Yes.
Thailand or whatever. Like we would love to be able to do that eventually as well. But yeah, in terms of big
Cool.
trips though, we actually wanted to plan a trip to Japan but in 2020 though, which obviously COVID
Yeah.
dashed those
Yeah.
plans, unfortunately. Um, Yeah, so still trying to figure out if we might be busy moving, but we're trying to figure out if we might be able to do something over the holidays this year. Actually, we were thinking
Yeah,
Mexico City. Um,
really,
actually,
I
I
love
don't know if
Mexico City.
I don't know if you have thoughts on like being there during like Christmas, New Year's though, or like
Oh,
if it's
it's
like
the
too
oh
crowded.
well. Wait, you're gonna be there over Christmas, New Year's? Because I'm gonna arrive in Mexico City on the
Oh, cool.
30th. So I
Oh,
don't know
cool. Well, I don't know.
if I could run
What
into
we're
you there.
doing. Yeah, no, that'd be
Well,
cool. But like,
anyways, uh,
it
I'll
sounds
send
like
you
if
recommendations. Yeah.
you'll be there, that's a good time of year to be there then.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I feel like weather-wise, it's like the best December through February. It's like when they have
Okay.
spring weather, more or less. Like, yeah, and it's like it's gorgeous. Yeah, I haven't been there in December, so I'm like arriving late December, but like the times that I've been there has been like January through March, typically. And then this year I
Okay.
was just there in July, for the rainy season. I just wanted to see what it would be like. Yeah, so.
Was it actually super rainy or?
So I was really worried about this because like you, I also get really sad, like the seasonal affective
Yeah,
disorder stuff.
sad. I get sad.
But yeah, I was like just curious because a part of me kind of wants my home base to be in Mexico City because I love it that
Oh,
much. So
cool.
I was like, oh, can I get
Wow.
like property there or just like rent permanently there? So that's why I wanted to experiment it with it in like the rainy season because I was like, I've only seen this in like seen the city in its best highlight season, um, and the rainy season was not bad at all. It would like every afternoon around like 3 to 4, like the clouds will roll in and then it'll storm really hard in the evening. But up until that point, it's like nice spring weather, perfect clear skies, or like with clouds or whatever. And so I was like, actually, their rainy season is not that bad. And like when it rains, I also
So it's
really
not
like
super rainy even, it sounds
yeah,
like.
it's not like constant overcast or like super rainy all the time. And it was very predictable. So you could kind of plan your day around it. You could just be like, I'll go take a nice walk in the morning and just like make sure I get back before it starts raining really hard or yeah, so I like it. Highly recommend. You should definitely go to Mexico City. Yeah.
Cool. Well, like
Yeah.
high praise if you're thinking of even moving there at some point.
Yeah, I know, exactly. So, I gotta ask you the question that I ask everyone, which is how do you define a stranger and at what point do they transition from being one to not being one?
I feel like yeah, I know you mentioned you were going to ask me this, and I feel like I was like trying to think about an answer, but it sounds like such a philosophical question actually. But at least how I was thinking about, I'm probably maybe even think about it too simplistically, but at least in my head, like a stranger is like maybe by this is like private dictionary definition, just like a person that you like don't know of at all, and that you might not even know that they exist or something.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think even after like one or two conversations, I feel like you can't really consider them a stranger anymore, at least based on that. Like you at least know, if you at least know their like name and like even if it's just like one thing about them, like where they were. Because I'm even thinking about like the random people in like my office that I'm not like super close to, like
Right.
or like even like random people on the elevator that I've run into like once or twice who are like don't even live like work in my office, but like I run into, right? They aren't really strangers anymore at that point because like I know their name and I've had like one conversation about them. Or even if I don't know their name, I know where they work, so and what they look like.
Right. Like they have like you have like one fact about them.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
I can latch onto or whatever. But
So does that imply that like even if you just see someone on the street, like you can just extract that fact from them and you're like they're no longer a stranger? If that makes sense. Like, oh,
like
like
at
you
least
saw
not a
them in
complete stranger. Well, I
okay.
feel like
Okay, but like
I
even
feel like you
without
have
interacting.
I feel like you
Okay.
do have to interact with them in some way, though. You can't just
Okay.
like
Okay.
not, because then it becomes like almost like stalking. I feel like I don't know, but I guess you can like because I feel like I don't know. I feel like that there's like a weird gray area with celebrities, though, because I was thinking about that too, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we know more about certain celebrities than we might even know about people we would consider to be friends or family,
Mm.
right? Which can be
Mm-hmm.
really weird.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
Weird to think about, right? Because it's like in some cases they're not a stranger to you, but you're definitely a stranger to them because like they can't know
Right.
all their fans, right? So I feel like it's like it gets really weird when you start thinking about public figures.
Yeah. 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 But technically they're not, under your definition, they're not strangers just because you
They're not, I
do,
guess, because
but
like,
you haven't interacted
but
with
you haven't
them.
interacted with them like physically. I feel like it has to be a mutual physical reaction. So it can't just be you like spying on them from afar, I guess, because that
So
I feel like
then
it can't be
celebrities
one-sided.
are strangers.
And maybe they are. Yeah, no, so okay, maybe I take that back. I feel like
Okay,
it
no,
has
I'm sorry, I'm just
no, yeah, no, I feel like it might have to be a mutual thing. So it's like they know a fact about you and you know a fact about them and you both have knowingly interacted with each other.
okay. Knowingly
Right.
interacted, okay.
Knowingly, because
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like there's probably I'm also thinking of the TV show You. Like there's like some weird stalker stuff that gets into weird territory with this, like
Right,
otherwise.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because yeah, I wanted to clarify that because you said like, oh, at least I know that this person is not a stranger because I know they work. I know where they work, which is like my office. So we work for the same company, and that's why I had to clarify. Like, do you need to interact with them because you know
I
that
feel like it
fact
needs to
about
be a
them without?
knowingly, yeah, like a knowingly mutual interaction. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But so if they can also reciprocate, basically.
Right, 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 right. Then they can also say they recognize you or like they know of who you
Exactly.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it has to go two ways, or else you get into weird stalker territory. Although I
Right.
guess another philosophical question though, because I feel like if a stalker really knows everything about you, I guess they're a stranger to you, but you probably aren't a stranger to them then at that point.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm. Food for thought.
So
That goes back to the
yeah, I don't know. It
celebrity
gets
thing though, where it's like,
yeah, I don't know because
right?
it's I'm just I feel like celebrities is top. I'm like really into celebrity gossip too. It's like my like guilty pleasure, I guess. But like it's just interesting because like I like Taylor Swift. Like her music's fine. But like I'm not like one of these like super fans where I feel like
Hmm.
she has a lot of fans who know like everything about her, which is
Yes.
like
Uh-huh.
crazy, right? So like they probably feel like they know her.
Right.
Obviously she doesn't know all of her fans, right? But it's just like a really
Yeah.
interesting phenomenon.
Right. Yep. Yep. There's a term for this, and we've talked about
There is.
this
There
particular
is.
term in like a previous episode, and I can't remember what it is. My memory is failing me now.
Same. I feel like I just read an article about this. And actually, growing up, I used to be like really obsessed with certain celebrities, so I kind of get it, like where it comes from. But
Yeah.
I can't
Right. Right.
imagine
Right.
being that celebrity though. That'd be crazy. I'm like a super private person. Actually,
Yeah.
I guess I mean, the whole podcast now knows obviously that I'm married, but actually, some people in my office actually don't know that I'm married yet. So,
Really? Wow.
because
Okay.
we got married like last month.
So now I guess you know Marilyn even better than her colleagues. Would you consider yourself a rebel or a Renaissance person? Do you have any pro tips on time management, or do you have any thoughts on anything else that we discussed during this conversation? You can write to me on Instagram at Don't Be Strangers or via email at Xinyi at don'tbestrangers.club. Don't worry, I'll just link that all into the description. But I also wanted to wrap up this episode by sharing some exciting things, including a reflection journal for this upcoming year. So, if you don't know Jasmine, who actually also did a previous episode with me, she runs our online co writing club every Saturday. It happens on our Discord at 11 a.m. Central Time in Dallas, which is, I believe, 5 p.m. like UK time, which is where she's based. And she was so generous to create a little digital journal for you to be able to reflect a little bit and then also set some goals for the new year's. So if you are interested in getting this free digital like reflection journal, you can find that linked below. And or if you are interested in joining her co-writing club, literally bring any project you want to work on, whether it's your resume, a fiction story that you're writing, or poetry. This is just like an accountability safe space for you to get stuff done, specifically in the writing realm. So I used to do this like a really long time ago, but I would upload like voice vlogs where I share a little bit about my life at the end of the episodes, and I kind of wanted to bring it back because these are sort of audio diaries, although I guess I'm starting to bring in a visual component. So if you don't know, I'm now uploading, if you're listening to this, I'm now uploading these episodes onto YouTube as well. So if you prefer like watching your podcast or just listening to them in the background on YouTube, then FYI, we're now on YouTube. Just search No Be Strangers. But I am back in Mexico City, and this is probably like my third long-term stay here. I just cannot get enough of the city, but I am actually recovering from jet lag because I spent the last 2 weeks of 2023 in Tokyo. This was a very belated like post-graduation trip for my little sister. She wanted to go to Tokyo, which would have been and is like her first time, but that happened in 2020. She graduated in 2020, and so that trip got canceled, and then finally we made it happen this year. And I had hoped that it would be more relaxing. We were there for 2 entire weeks, so I was like, oh, every day we would just kind of like go explore a little bit, eat a little bit, and then come home and chill and watch movies, which, by the way, my hubby and I, we binged like all of Harry Potter on Netflix while we were in Japan in the duration of those 2 weeks after we got home from our exploration. And where am I going with this? I think I just wanted to say that I'm really tired. Tokyo was amazing. I'm really tired. I was suffering from jet lag a lot coming out of it, but also on top of recovering from jet lag, I think I'm also recovering from social burnout. So when I was reflecting on 2023, I realized that at the beginning of that year, I was in Spain for 3 months. So from January through March, and it was amazing, but I kept moving cities. So I was in Barcelona for a month, then Sevilla, then Madrid. And what is so hard about this, if you've ever moved to a new city to like start your life, is finding friends. And within what I've discovered with like the digital nomad lifestyle I have is that like when you're in a city for a month, it's really hard to find deep, meaningful connections. Usually I can find someone by like the second or third week, but if you're only in a city for a month like I was, then I only have like 1 week left to like hang out with them before I have to do this all over again. So all this to say, I think I like recounted this in past like voice blogs like this in like life updates, but I was really lonely. And so returning to Dallas, my home base, after 3 months of, I guess, loneliness, even though yes, I was traveling with my hubby, he couldn't replace like all my social needs. So going back to Dallas was really refreshing because I have a very strong like community of friends, and also it's like my home base for where I run a lot of my physical events right now, although we have started to do a bit more remote events thanks to volunteers who are like willing to stand up and just like run them. I have a girl out in Vancouver who's been doing some open book clubs out there, and then Marissa, who is starting to do an open book club out in Austin, Texas. So thank you. And as an aside, if you're interested in hosting an event with us, it can be one-off or recurring. Just let me know. Again, in all the same modalities that you can reach me that I've stated before. But let me think. What was I saying? Yes, so going back to Dallas, I just dove right back into my community of like personal friends, and then also hit the ground running, like doing like hosting my own events out there. And I was, since then, which was like April until the end of the year, I have not had a true like social break, because when I'm in Dallas, between events and my own like personal social life, it's really tight for time. In fact, like I realized I was not making enough time for myself to not only like nourish myself as an ambivert slash introvert, but also even when I was traveling over the summer, when I went to Mexico City again. So I was here in Mexico City in July last year, and then also in New York, which I think I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. I didn't really get any social breaks because I have a community of friends here in Mexico City. And then when I was in New York, the reason why I was in New York was actually because I was out there visiting a bunch of friends who had moved there post-pandemic, since they all hit their midlife crisis, and realized like it's now or never, gotta live out my New York dream. So all that said, I am currently here right now, beginning of January, recovering from jet lag, recovering from social burnout of like 9 months of like nonstop just giving my time to other people. But on the upside, in the same vein, reviewing 2023, I also did a lot of things for myself, such as publishing my book, like hosting events that I thought I would have never hosted, like the book launch, but then also large scale group events, which is not something that I was comfortable with. And then doing my first ever public speaking gig, which I've also talked about in past episodes at the Boss Vision conference. So shout out to Amanda of Dallas Girl Gang for giving me that opportunity. But point is, I am healing right now. And part of healing actually, so on Black Friday, I don't know if you got anything for Black Friday. I wasn't planning to. I wasn't planning to buy anything, but then randomly I was reminded of this. For listeners who cannot see, what I'm pointing to on my wrist is I have an Apollo Neuro wristband, and the idea is that this thing can play vibrational tones. And also, don't put me on any of this because I can't explain it scientifically, but having studied neuroscience and also following the biohacking community, I believe in the power of like touch and also vibration and like vibrational energy. And basically, this little wearable is supposed to help attune, like from the neuroscience standpoint, like calm your nervous system or even like elevate your nervous system for certain like activities such as social activities, presentations, helping you to go to sleep, to calm down, unwind. And I've been battling stress for so long, and I just wanted something to help accelerate this process. So that was the main reason why I got it. And along the line of healing and personal development, are you also a healing girl? Because I'm hosting my first ever retreat with my good friend Molly Ho at the end of March. It's going to be an entire week, March 22nd. Oh no, March 25th, that's a Monday, to Friday, March 29th in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, where the idea is to create a very intimate space for women, only like 5 guests, not including Molly and me, so it would be like a group of 7 in total. Of girls who just like want to unplug. We'll be doing activities like yogas, photo shoot, taco walks, oracle readings, like little life visioning workshops. And I'm nervous but really excited. If you haven't like noticed, I love challenging myself, hence like public speaking, because I still have a lot of stage fright. So but anyways, if you want more information on this spring break retreat, Healing Girl Spring Break Retreat, I will have that linked in the bio. Or you can just visit our Instagram. It's like pinned to the top of the page and also in like the little link in bio as well. Okay, so I just did a little recap of 2023, kind of like hit the retreat as like a upcoming thing that I'm keen for in 2024, but I don't want to give away too many spoilers because I'm about to record another episode with my friend Molly to talk about what we're looking forward to in terms of like our goals and intentions for the new year. So if you're into that sort of thing, basically goal setting or just like personal development and like looking forward, then stick around for the next episode. I'd love to hear what your goals and intentions are, and you can find out how to connect with the community and me with the links in the bio. So as always, don't be a stranger. Bye.